Hi, I'm Andrew Beattie. Welcome again for this Down to Business episode, and today I'm joined with Diane Loong to talk everything about, I guess, that tough subject of HR, employment, employees, etc. Very, very important to get right in our business for any business owner. You know, we sometimes feel that employees could be, a pain, but reality is they're a massive asset, and without them, we don't have a business in most cases. So Di's from Skildare. I'll let her tell you a bit more about herself. Thanks, Di.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, I'm the Managing Director of Skildare. Skildare was founded in 2012 because we saw a need in the market for an outsourced provider of HR to predominantly small to medium-sized enterprises. And we offer the full range of employee relations and HR advice to clients right across Newcastle, the Hunter, and right around New South Wales now. We have some clients down in Sydney and across Tamworth, Dubbo, all over.
It's growing.
It's growing,
yeah.
Yes.
I guess to start with, we're pretty flippant when we just say HR.
Yep.
Many people, that's even confusing in its own right, and most won't ask what it is because, we should know.
Yeah, that's right.
What is HR, human resources, etc.?
Well, human resources is a huge area, in all honesty. So it's anything to do with people within the organisation, essentially. So it's about managing two main areas, really. So it's about managing our legal compliance when it comes to our people. So that's paying people properly, making sure we've got due diligence around awards or maybe enterprise agreements. And there's lots of legislation around anti-bullying and anti-harassment, workers' comp, work health and safety. So anything related to people, there's a lot of risk mitigation that we've got to look at around people. But then there's also the best practice. So it's about having solid policies and procedures that are related specifically to your business, because every business is different. It's making sure that we have procedures in place to manage performance around employees, etc. So it really covers everything from the recruitment and selection of an employee right down to, and everything in between, right down to exiting an employee.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's a good explanation around just the sheer gamut of what's involved, because
huge.
I think too many people and business owners for that matter, when they think HR, they think negative. They think how am I staying out of trouble, etc. But it can be very much a positive too, and we'll touch on some of those points. I know for me, we employ a few hundred people, and when you look at that, it's a constant need to be on top of.
Constant.
So with that sort of segue, how do you work specifically with business owners and particularly SMEs?
Yeah, sure. Well, as the Managing Director, I'm the first port of call, if you like, to any prospective new client or any client we're going to onboard to work with Skildare. So I'll go out and I'll meet with the client, and I really get to understand them and their business and what their needs are, what their priorities specifically are. After that, then I will go back, and once I've got a really good understanding of what their needs are, I'll go back and I'll write a proposal, and I'll detail in depth what we will do for them and the area and the priorities. And I tend to kind of chunk it out in what the priorities are. And often the priorities would be around meeting compliance. So it's about making sure that there's due diligence around, are they paying correctly under the award, for example, and are their contracts good enough that's protecting the business, but also is it covering off on the things that the legislation requires us to cover off on. So we'll often look at getting the solid framework in place first, and making sure that we've got our managing risk. Essentially, it's all about managing risk for the business ultimately. And then we look at some of the best practice stuff, so having robust policies, robust performance management mechanisms, onboarding, all of those kind of things that we look at. So I'll develop a proposal around that, and I'll also then, with one of our consultants, we align one of our consultants specifically to every client. So they're not getting a different consultant every time. There's one consultant that's dedicated to each client, and that way the consultant gets to know the business intimately. They get to know who's who in the zoo, and they understand the business and work with the business leaders to satisfy the needs of all their HR requirements.
Okay, so it sounds pretty intimate still.
Very
personal.
Very, very intimate, and that's the key. That's why we have all of our consultants have just got a dedicated clients that they work with, because of that exact reason. Because we do have very intimate relationships with our clients, because we do see some very difficult things. We deal with some very challenging things at times, and sometimes we deal with some of the failures in leadership that we have to sometimes navigate and help them with. So it is definitely a very intimate relationship we have with clients.
So with that in mind, I guess, in our industry in particular, and in the accounting business advisory space, we've seen a lot of transition over the last, I'd call it 5 to 10 years, where businesses are saying we don't need that employed internal resource anymore, and they're relying more on a needs-based provider and outsource, which is effectively what you're doing in your business. Being clear about it, what is the difference between having someone internal versus external? Maybe what are some of the pros and cons?
Sure. Particularly in the SME, we concentrate predominantly in the SME space. So we have clients anywhere between half a dozen employees right up to 500 and everything in between. Probably the vast majority of our clients have anywhere between sort of 50 to 150 employees. The outsource model works very, very well in that space, predominantly because to justify having a HR department, because often having just one person is never enough, because if you have one person and you pay them an average salary, they're either going to be very good at the transactional sort of part of and at that end, or they're going to be very strong at the senior level, and not want to be bothered with the transactional stuff. Whereas you need all
the breadth.
So we provide, and even though we have one consultant going in working with every business, behind them they've got all of Skildare behind them. So every consultant has got a whole HR department in Skildare behind them. So whilst it's one person being the HR manager for all of our clients, they have we've got all of our staff have got massive amounts of strategic experience, right down to we've got some new graduates that do a lot of the administrative sort of transactional grunt, if you like, HR stuff. So every client, when they get Skildare, they get a whole HR department for the cost of, the cost of one person essentially. So from that perspective, particularly in the SME where they just can't justify. The nature of HR as well can be that it can be a bit of this, sometimes you're flat out, and then sometimes there'll be some lulls. So again, if you've got one person or a small team, particularly in a small to medium-sized business, there'll be times where they're not that busy. So you're paying sometimes for resources that you might not need at certain times.
Yeah, sure. So you can give a much more tailored.
So we can give them a lot
valued benefit.
Right, exactly right. So, and we also don't lock in, and it's kind of a bit of a badge of honour for us. We work predominantly on a retainer basis, and we do that because of the intimacy we have with our clients, and we want to be proactive. Years ago, because I've actually been in consulting since 2002.
Look that old dog.
Thanks so much. You can turn a couple of those lights off. But I have been, and when I first started, it was very small. I had young children and a husband that travelled a lot for work at the time. But my clients kind of called me when they needed me. I wasn't working on a retainer sort of basis then. And what I found is all I was just doing was reacting to problems. I was just putting out bushfires. And that really doesn't add a lot of value. Whilst putting out a bushfire for a client, they can be very grateful for it, and they go, thanks very much, that was, you saved us there. But it's not adding value in the long term to a client if all we're doing is just putting out bushfires.
Sure. Yeah.
So the reason why we go on that retainer basis is that while we putting out bushfires, yes, we do a fair bit of that, but it's also about them being proactive as well to prevent the bushfires from starting in the first place.
And that's probably in every one of these videos that we've done, trying to help small business owners in their respective fields. There's one consistent theme that everyone says, look, you need a plan. And there's no different here. I think that's what you're saying.
No different. That's exactly right. And when we put the proposal to a client, to engage with the client, that's essentially what we're writing is a strategic HR plan.
Yeah, sure.
And we tailor it. I mean, I think a lot of small businesses kind of think strategic HR plan, isn't that for really big business? Why do we need a strategic HR plan? But we need to do it to mitigate risk, because small businesses face just as much risk sometimes as bigger business.
Well, if not more.
Yeah, that's right.
So they've got more to lose.
That's right, exactly. So it is really important that we do get the compliance stuff right and mitigate risk for them. And then put in some best practice as well.
Sure.
Best practice HR.
Okay, so we've just explained, I guess, how broad this HR aspect of a business is and how many things we could cover off. But particularly for our smaller businesses that probably have a few gaps, what are some of the key HR or employment related issues that are just no-brainers, must be covered? And not just for legal, but should be covered just to be competitive?
I think again, going back to the compliance stuff, and this is where a lot of particularly small to medium, although we've seen it in bigger companies as well, around the awards and the employee relations area is a very complex area. It's too complex, to be honest. It's way too complex for business owners to try and navigate. And we'll often, when we're onboarding clients, they'll often say to us, yeah, we're paying people well above award, we're paying people right, and I think we're good there. And once we get in and do a bit of a deep dive and have a look, often they are, but there's a lot of times we have found holes where they're exposed potentially. So definitely understanding, and a lot of the time, actually most of the time, it's just through ignorance or them not understanding. They've interpreted something incorrectly. So a lot of the time they think they're doing the right thing when invariably they're exposing the business. So definitely compliance around awards and all that kind of thing is a really critical thing for them, because we're reading in the newspaper every day about businesses who are stung by Fair Work for not complying. So that's a big thing. Having good solid contracts in place is very, very important as well, and it's ultimately about protecting the business. That's ultimately what our role is to mitigate risk for our client, to make sure that they're doing the right thing, and are covered for themselves in the case of anything going pear-shaped. So solid policies and procedures is also very important. So being able to manage and so it's essentially policies and procedures about setting the ground rules in an organisation.
How we play.
Yeah, exactly. Setting the ground rules and then sticking by it and using that in a way to be able to manage people proactively, etc. Sure. And often you'll see that if we don't have good policies in place, or the policies just get lip service, or they haven't been written to suit the needs of your business, often we'll see that if employers don't act in accordance with their policies, that's where they get stung in Fair Work, because if they weren't acting in accordance, they may have terminated somebody but didn't follow a due diligence process around managing a particular grievance before somebody was terminated, for example. So it's a bit of a minefield, but having a good solid foundation around good policies that suit your business, that are flexible enough as well, contracts and compliance around awards and enterprise agreements, etc., is really essential. But on top of that, then we come into some of the softer things that are less tangible, if you like. And that's making sure that your supervisors and your team leaders and your line managers actually, that are responsible, that have leadership responsibilities, actually have skills in that area too.
And educated.
Yeah. Absolutely. So time and time again, that's what we say. We can have all the best frameworks in the world, but if we don't have leaders that actually know how to use them, and actually, because, as HR people, we don't have authority in any of our clients' business. All we can do is try and influence behaviour and try and influence people to lead well. And that's what we try to do with our clients, is to coach and mentor their leadership team, to try and give regular feedback and manage people in accordance with both, doing it in accordance with what the expectations are around the laws, but also doing it in an engaging way as well, to get the best out of their people. Because what we find is that probably one of the key areas that we find that we have to deal with a lot is, talking about putting out bushfires, is we'll get an employee who might have been, not a great fit for the organisation. For example, their behaviour might be quite negative, or their performance is not there, and yet it's allowed kind of fester for a long time. And it's the leadership that often are not brave enough or don't have the skills to deal with it until it kind of becomes, to the point where everyone's at breaking point and something has to give. And then it becomes, we have to sort of untangle it all before we can then potentially either get the person back on track or exit the person in the appropriate way.
I think that the education piece just raised there is key for me. I deal with clients and businesses, for that matter, of all shapes and sizes, and we've still got that legacy issue where a lot of people are promoted to, say, a manager or a leader position because they've been there the longest, or they're the most technical in what they do. Right. Yeah. But they don't like people, and I think there's a bit of a mismatch there. So not only is it education, I imagine also you're really doing a bit of a review on what fits, and if people don't fit, it's maybe you should look for something different.
That's right. Which is why the recruitment piece is so important, But it also, with that as well comes understanding, and I talk a lot about this with my clients, is understanding values. And I know people roll their eyes and they go, values, here we go, warm and fuzzy sort of stuff. But values are an absolutely critical part of an organisation.
I
Understanding.
agree.
Yeah. So, and if you understand what your values are, whatever they are, if they're right for your business, it's about recruiting to your values. So I know at Skildare, when we're recruiting to bring in a consultant into our business, we talk at the interview stage about how important peer review is. For example, we peer review each other's work all the time before it ever goes to a client, and that's about making sure we get the best quality, and and we're working as a team to get the best outcome for a client. But if you're a person who doesn't like to be peer reviewed, if you're a person that likes to, is uncomfortable either giving feedback to a peer or getting feedback from a peer, you're not right for us.
Which is probably a lot of people.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. So we talk a lot about that in our interviews, to say this is how we operate, and this is what our expectations are for anyone who comes in to join our team, and collaboration and all those things that are very much a part of our values and our culture. So I think organisations need to do a lot more of that. Because that's the point where I'm gaining from you. If I was interviewing you, for example, I'm reading from you whether you're going to be comfortable with how Skildare operate, and you're also going to determine whether that's right for you as well. So we're much better, then equipped to be able to say whether Andrew is the right fit for us in our business or not. Because if we employ you when you're not the right fit, that's where the trouble starts.
Yeah, it'll only end up in one way.
Yeah, so that's right.
I'm very interested and glad you brought up the values thing. I think the problem is there's so many consultants and that sort of thing these days that have bastardised that concept of values.
I agree.
That people put the fluff around it, but really I couldn't agree more that that's where it starts.
Exactly.
And values that aren't going on the wall necessarily for marketing purposes or PR, but more what you live by.
That's exactly right.
And a real means something to you.
Yeah. So I think that's there's nothing surer than that, and I think the more we talk about it, and it doesn't have to be, our value of respect, and it's just becoming it's the way we raised our kids, isn't it? We raised our kids. We don't
treat others the way you want to be treated.
Exactly. It's almost as simple as that. And what's really important to us, and we raise our kids about being honest and about telling the truth and about being respectful and all those kind of things, because we want to raise them to be good human beings. And dealing in organisations the concept is identical. It's about making sure that the values that you have coming into our business are aligned with us, and so we're sure that when you're stepping out into one of our clients' business, that you're representing Skildare in a value the way in the way we want you to represent us. And I think that's a very, very important, and that goes with anything, whether you're making nuts and bolts. You do it in accordance with good quality and with respect and with due diligence and all that to make sure you're making the best.
It applies to every business.
Applies to
every organisation.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah.
And I won't touch it too much, but I think the other one I really think is a key message there, and I see this time and time again, is right people on the bus and make sure they're in the right seat.
Exactly.
And then we can have fun with that terminology, and from Jim Collins with the stuff he went through, but realistically, it's making sure you've got the right people and they're doing what their skill set is.
That's correct. Yeah. And if you don't have the right people as well, Andrew, and every employer, I don't care who you are or how good you are, we've all made mistakes about recruiting the wrong people. We all have. So it's about doing something about that when that does happen.
Well, and in the last video we went through, we had the girls from People Fusion,
right,
and we talked about that whole interview process and recruitment. And I think we get it wrong because a lot of people can train for an interview.
That's right.
So that's a good point. Very good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that in mind, we've gone through what are some of the key things that need to be covered. What are some of the common mistakes you see business owners make or are making or could make, in their businesses, and whether that be historical now or trying to, work their way through this litigious world with it?
Yeah. And I think it's not keeping on top of things is probably the big thing, particularly for small to medium enterprises that don't have sort of an internal or an outsourced sort of but ongoing sort of HR support. The environment is changing so rapidly, constantly. There's precedent been set all the time in Fair Work that changes the rules of how we might terminate somebody, for example, or around flexibility arrangements in the workplace. It's now stated in law that there's obligations for employers around that area. So there's so much changing. So it's about employers needing to keep on top of that. And it's virtually impossible for somebody who's gone into business to be an engineer or to have a plumbing business or to make whatever or to produce whatever to be on top of all of that as well. It's very, very, we're flat out keeping on top of it, in that space. So
I think that's a key point. It's not so much that the legislation is just getting bigger, it's also constantly changing.
Constantly
and with government, etc., depends what
Exactly.
side of the fence you sit on, but it's a hard one.
It's a tough one. And often it's not that employers don't have enough stuff in place, it's that there's too much stuff to navigate, that they need help with. That it's constantly changing. We're constantly updating clients, constantly, around changes in awards, around, there's domestic violence, there's whistleblower policies now that have just been legislated, there's flexibility arrangements, there's new changes to casual employees and how they should be engaged. So it's constantly changing. So we just need to be, what we find is where employers get caught out, if you like, is not keeping up with the changes in legislation and awards, and not dealing quickly enough with the changes that are happening. I also see, we talk a lot about technology, and how quickly technology is changing and how it's changing the face of how we do business and how we communicate, etc. Kind of employees and how we manage employees is changing rapidly too. And a lot of that is instigated by law and by precedent and how we need to deal with people. But the expectations of employees coming into our workplaces now has changed drastically. Even in the last 5 years, it's changed drastically of how the expectations around how we communicate with them and how often we communicate with them and what flexibility they are demanding and all of these kind of things. So it's employers really needing to it's moving almost as fast as technology is, the expectations around how we should manage employees in the workplace.
Yeah, I think, to me, there is so much that gets focused on trying to protect ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
That sometimes, well, not just sometimes, all too often, that business owners and employers find they don't have time to do anything else. Yes, or if they're trying to, their HR part of their diary or their week is really that, are we doing the right thing? And missing a key part where they really get some benefit out of actually investing in their employees and having mentoring frameworks or just, sessions where we're talking to each other.
Yes.
Which, I'm obviously not a lawyer, but sometimes that can go as far as that investment in that relationship and go as far as maybe ease some of those other burdens as well on if you do get things a bit wrong in the litigation and that employment space.
Yeah, and I think that's a really critical area. But there's a skill involved in doing that.
Actually,
and there's a lot of people who are not comfortable doing that, and a lot of the time they're not comfortable, in that engagement piece and making sure that they do speak to their people enough because. And I think sometimes, and I've seen it so many times where sometimes managers are scared, particularly around an employee that might be a bit prickly or a bit difficult to deal with. They're kind of a bit terrified to talk to them just in case they say the wrong thing and it's used against them down the track. But we have to so part of our role really is about navigating that with them and making it okay for them and helping them have the real conversation and the brave conversation.
So have you seen that get worse? I'm not picking on generations here, but as times have changed and I just know now, I know I don't look this old either, Di, but I've been practicing about 20 years. And from the start, there wasn't email usage and that sort of stuff. And now I see that everyone wants to communicate, even if they're sitting a couple of desks away, via email, which it to me, there's a lot in that to say relationships aren't as strong, people are not prepared or not used to having tough conversations, and therefore that will always be a confrontational issue.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think to some extent we've set up sort of businesses, and I spoke about this with clients there a while ago. Some of the ways, I think some of the laws have enabled us to kind of hide behind not having the brave conversation because there's a fear just in case, it'll be used against me if I say something to you, you're gonna document it and use against me down the track. So I think a lot of people are scared to have the conversation. But I also think that the way we've been a bit too clunky with how we've managed employees in the past. Really, we've been very clunky about setting KPIs at the beginning of the year, and then sort of we'll have formal conversations throughout the year, and that'll be good to go. It doesn't work that way. Human beings don't work that way.
Yeah, that's right.
And the expectations around that, particularly with the younger generations coming in, where they want instant feedback and they want regular feedback, and they should get it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. So I think the days of old where we would just lock you into very structured, formalised feedback, and in between you'd kind of get very little unless you were doing something wrong. those days are long gone. And I think employers that still want to stick to that very clunky, structured way of managing performance and giving feedback are going to be left behind.
Yeah, and I remember one of my first roles, we often got told that, positive feedback was if you didn't get told you did anything wrong.
That's right.
And that's something we've got to evolve as well.
Definitely.
Because from what I've seen, especially new generations, they thrive off that.
Yeah.
Not only positive, but feedback in general.
And they expect it. And they absolutely do thrive on it, but it's an expectation as well. And the reality is, Andrew, if they don't get it in your organisation, they're going to go somewhere else. Where they will get it, because it's a critical part of that engagement piece. And that's when it comes down to then the skills of the leader at every level, the middle management right up to senior management, to be able to do that and do that well, and do it in with genuine care and genuinely wanting to provide feedback and action.
So in any organisation's training plan, whether it be formal, informal, document or not, it can't be just what they do from a delivery point of view, but realistically, if they're in charge of people, they've got to start building that skill of how do I manage people.
Absolutely. It's critical. So
I guess, again, another good segue, but here's the value add. How can business owners really use that whole HR function to their advantage, whether it be in their market, their business, their industry, whatever it may be?
I think there's a huge opportunity for employers that if they get their HR right, particularly the best practice side of things, they can really become we've used the old adage employer of choice, but it's a very real thing. That if they engage well with their people, if they've got strong leadership, which is really, really important. And we're not talking about comparing ourselves to Apple and Google and all those kind of things. I mean, we've got some very small clients who've got it going on with their leadership. They're brilliant leaders. So we're talking about leaders that are just genuine and engage and genuinely care about their people. It's not about throwing money and having the best fit out locations and all those kind of things, but it's about genuinely caring and engaging and making sure that the employees feel valued. And it can be something very, very simple. So I think, but it's also more and more as well, employees are requiring flexibility in the workplace. And I know that can't be given for every role. There's some roles that flexibility is not going to be, is just not going to work, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But organisations need to, and employers need to open up their mind to flexibility in the workplace, because the reality is, if I'm a working mum and I'm working 40 hours a week, but I really would love to work 32 hours a week just to juggle my life, and I can't get it here, I potentially will go somewhere else to get it. So it's looking and to potentially to retain and attract good people. Flexibility is going to be a really big thing. That ongoing piece around understanding your values and engaging well. So it's just having an organisation where I want to get up every day and go into work. And that's about having a solid HR framework in place, having good leadership, and understanding flexibility arrangements and what people want. It's not always about the dollars. I think being competitive in that space and making sure you're benchmarked well and that you're paying people well, because you will lose people if you don't pay them in, kind of market rate. But it's everything else in between. It's them going in and feeling that they're valued. Or they can work from home maybe occasionally, or there is some flexibility, there's give and take, and there's trust there, I think is a huge factor. But having a solid HR framework that's designed specifically for your business will enable employers to provide that. But because if they don't get it here, they'll go somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, and more employers are copping on to that. But it's critical that, as it's an evolving thing. It's just like technology, it's evolving. And more people are demanding that more than money, and it's that flexibility and around their workplace.
And I think that's a key point, really. It's probably like changing banks. A lot of people used to think it was hard to do it.
Yes.
And it'd be the same with employees, but it is so easy to find other opportunities now, and more importantly, it's so easy for other employers to spruik, I guess, what they are doing well to reach the market.
Exactly, that's right. And they'll become the choice for employees, absolutely. I've seen employees many times take a pay cut. They're happy to take a pay cut if it gives them flexibility in other areas, or they have other workplace arrangements going on.
Quite interesting.
Yeah, so employers are just going to have to, with technology now, it's enabling us to be a little bit more flexible. But it's employers kind of shaking off some of the traditional ways of how do I trust somebody if they're going to work from home for the day, and so it's about creating that value add for the and what values are important in your workplace. And if you've got an employee who lives and breathes the values, and there's trust there, and you've got clear line of sight of what they do and what they're producing for you, they should be able to work from home, and you should trust that they will do that.
And I think it's also flexibility is obviously a big point, but there's also a lot of other benefits that an employer can provide that don't need to cost that much.
Exactly right.
And dress codes and that sort of thing, and not working the stand hours. I guess that fits the flexibility.
That's correct.
The training and development,
yep.
There's a lot of that. So we see that in our own business, that when you really think about it and you actually recognise what you do,
yep.
They probably are already doing many things in many cases, but don't let people know about it.
That's correct. Exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we've been through a lot of information, so here's my attempt at trying to give a summary and wrapping up. But I think if we said, HR is such a big part in any business,
Huge.
whether you've got one employee, 1,000 employees, whatever it may be.
Yes.
And, we're in an environment where things are changing constantly.
Absolutely.
And trying to keep on top of it is very hard to do.
Yes.
So I guess the plug for you is you need an outsourced or internal, but we're saying outsourced HR solution. And I think, what you've said to us is that the HR gives you, the outsourced HR gives you a lot more breadth, because you're not really employing just one skill.
That's correct.
But the key message there is employers cannot afford not to have some sort of solution.
That's correct. Yeah. I think employers, at the end of the day, they need to invest in their people. It's their biggest resource most often, and organisations that go along that don't actually invest in their people, whether it's to develop them or provide good robust frameworks for them, are going to be left behind.
Yeah, well, if they're not right, your customers and everything else will never
be
right.
reflected. So, yeah.
I guess at a bare minimum, you said from a HR point of view, awards, good contracts, great policies and procedures. Correct. And the big one which I liked was really making sure you've got good values in place. That's and that people are living those. So there's a lot more to it, but at a bare minimum, I think we said really get to that.
Yeah.
Common mistakes and oversights where you're saying people just aren't staying on top of things.
That's right.
And which we've said is hard to do, but
it
is a responsibility to make sure that you are on top of that and ensure that you're regularly reviewing it and you have your documents updated, etc., etc. Yeah. So, again, a lot more than that, but these are some of the things we can really get focused on if we want to get quick bang for buck.
That's correct.
And finally, I think, which I really think deserves more time, and maybe for another video around some of the ways you could use HR to your advantage and really looking after employees. Flexibility, that came up in our recruitment, I guess, video as well, around making sure you've got that openness to flexibility and benefits. The values come up again.
Yes.
Employers want to use that. And generally just make an environment where you've got good leadership that people want to come be a part of.
Absolutely, it's critical.
Yeah. So I've probably missed stuff, but
no, that's
would you like to add anything else, Di?
No, I think you've wrapped it up really well. I think ultimately it's a specialised area, HR. It's a vast area as we've spoken about, and I think it's critical. And if employers see the value in their people, then they just need to invest and spend some time and make sure that the people are well looked after.
Yeah, and I think and I'll finish where we started. Employees, from a financial point of view, I know they recognise an expense and a liability. When you look at it that way, but in reality, we don't have a business without our people.
That's exactly right.
And the more you can get right with your people, there is no doubt that you'll have a stronger business, and every other factor that comes off your business will be stronger.
That's correct. Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
With that, we might say thank you very much, Di, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Till the next time we do another session, hopefully get some help, some benefits out of that, and cheers.